Well, welcome everyone. My name is Marc-André Pichon. I'm the director of the Canadian Centre for the Study of Cooperatives. And of course, today I'm coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, and this is the land of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and Dakota for millennia. It's also the traditional homeland of the Métis. And we're grateful for this opportunity to work on this land, share in its bounty, we're all doing now, to reflect on its beauty, and to reaffirm our commitment to the hard, shared, and necessary work of reconciliation. Today's talk comes at a challenging time in Canada. Too many people face homelessness, housing insecurity, food insecurity. A recent StatScan report found that the rate of food security in Canada is an all-time high, and often these are income issues. And that's what Karl's going to talk to us about today. Before I introduce Karl, I'd like to acknowledge that this event couldn't be possible without our partners. And our partners include Colleen Christopherson Cote, who's here somewhere. Oh, over there. There she is. And the Saskatoon Poverty Reduction Partnership. Since 2010, Saskatoon Poverty Reduction Partnership has been working tirelessly and collaboratively with a network of partners that reduce poverty in Saskatoon. I'd also like to acknowledge Isabel Finley. Isabel is somewhere here too. Oh, there she is. And the Community University Institute for Social Research. CUSAR is an interdisciplinary research center that has been active since 2000 and engages in social research that is relevant to community. It helps to improve the quality of our lives. They are no strangers to Station 20 West and have probably presented their research here more than any other USAS unit that I can think of. I'd also like to acknowledge the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy. That's where I work out of. It's situated within the University of Saskatchewan, and JSGS is one of Canada's leading policy schools, provides high quality education, train future public servants, and offer professional development opportunities for current public servants. And of course, I'd like to thank Station 20 West for hosting us today and providing us with some delicious food. Thank you to Donna Weldon and her staff for all your help and service. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce you our featured speaker today, Dr. Karl Widerquist. Karl is a professor of philosophy at Georgetown University-Qatar. Karl is one of those rare individuals who enjoyed his first PhD in economics so much, he went back for a second one in political theory. Karl focuses his research on theorizing about questions of distributive justice or the ethics of who has what. Karl is a prolific writer. He has published dozens of articles and 9 books, although I thought you said 11 the other day. Up to 11, right. Including the prehistory of private property, implications for modern political theory, and a critical analysis of basic income experiments for researchers, policymakers, and citizens. And his most recent book, entitled Universal Basic Income, is out now. So on a personal note, I also want to say that Karl's a friend. In the late 1990s, Karl and I worked together at a place called the Levy Economics Institute in upstate New York. And I like to say the Levy was a special place at the time, this think tank. It was a hub of critical thinking about economics, with most of the associated faculty developing what would later become known, or what is known today as modern monetary theory, and an associated jobs program, guaranteed jobs program. But over in the other wing of the mansion, the Greek Revival mansion, we looked this up yesterday, was Karl. And Karl was deepening his thinking about basic income, beginning to publish on the topic, and I think eventually coming to the conclusion that he needed to pursue that second PhD. So that's a bit about Karl. Just lastly, a word on process. Karl's going to talk to us for about 30 minutes. After that, we're going to have a Q&A, folks here and the folks online. And so we're going to get both those places. We'll be monitoring for questions all around. And we'll be passing a microphone for anyone who's here who wants to ask a question. For those of you who are online, we ask that you ask your questions on the Zoom chat. I'll be monitoring those and asking them on your behalf of Karl. If anyone's experiencing technical difficulties online, that's you folks, please message Stan Yu, and Stan's going to be recording this session, and we'll share the link will be shared with everyone who registered for the event, and we'll be emailing everyone after today's talk. So with that, I'd like to invite Karl up the podium here, and Karl, welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. So I'm here today to talk about basic income, or universal basic income, which before it had a name, Bertrand Russell described it like this more than 100 years ago. A certain small income, sufficient for necessaries, should be secured to all, whether or not they work. And a larger income should be given to those who are willing to engage in some work that the community recognizes as useful. On this basis, we may build further. Basic income is not the end of social justice, but it is a very important step towards social justice. On its own, it's a mild reform. All we're doing is creating a floor under everyone's income. You can have the market economy with whatever social democratic elements you want other than that, but the floor is no longer zero. To realize that we can have basic income is to realize that income doesn't have to start at zero. The default position in our society is no income, is economic destitution. It is living on the street, having no ability to hunt, gather, fish, farm, or start a business or a cooperative of your own because all the resources are owned by someone else. That is the default position for all of us. Most of us know that if we were to stop working for our employer or for our bank or for our clients or for our landlords, we would very quickly be on the street like so many we pass in our cities today. Most people, when they finish school, are in this position. They have to get a job right away to keep themselves alive and to keep themselves housed and keep themselves going. The few who aren't are of the wealthiest few among us. The wealthiest few whose parents are willing to share their money with their children when they come of age. All the rest of us, this is our default position. We have a lot of help for people. We have a program for the elderly and a program for the disabled and a program for people who are temporarily unemployed and programs for other things like that. But all of those things have conditional requirements that you must meet these conditions. So all of those, for those also, the default for those, all of those programs is still destitution, poverty, homelessness. Because if you fail to meet those conditions, you are eligible for nothing. And there are a lot of people living on the street today or living in homeless shelters who are eligible for basically nothing. Now, but all basic income does is then to raise the floor, and then this default position can be a little bit higher. Enough money that you can afford food, shelter, clothing, some basic transportation, a little cushion so that you're not showing signs of economic distress. That's the ideal basic income that I'd like to see. We could start at less if you want to see how it works before we get going, but that's what I'd most like to see. It's just and on top of that, you could go out and get your job. You could work for all these other people. We can have fabulously wealthy people and lots of trade and stuff like that. Is not the end of the market economy. It's a market economy that is kinder, that is more humane, that is less stressful for everyone, because none of us ever needs to have that fear. We're not motivated by fear anymore. We're motivated by opportunity, challenge, and other things. So it's a mild reform, but it is one that makes us radically rethink some of our common beliefs. Like one belief that people often will bring up, they'll say something to the effect of, well, it's wrong to give anything to the poor unless they give back or prove that they can. We should have reciprocity. If you give, you should give back. Well, but that argument for reciprocity is taking the fact that reciprocity doesn't exist in the economy we have now for reasons that Marc-Andre talked about in his introduction. The land that we're standing on was taken from people who were sharing the land, and it was given to people who do not share the land, people who say only the privileged own the land. Everyone else can get access to the land to the extent that they work not for each other, but for the privilege. We all work for the most privileged among us. We like to think that we live in a circle of obligation where we all work for each other, but we actually work in a hierarchy. To the extent that my work benefits another person is to the extent that that person is able to buy what I'm selling, and that to do that, they have to work for somebody higher up. You will work for a landlord, you will work for a bank, you will work for an employer, you will work for clients. If you have some great idea to say end tuberculosis among people in Africa, which is perfectly feasible, what would the first thing you would do? Well, you can't go and sell your tuberculosis cure to the people who are suffering from it in Africa because they don't have any money. So you will go to rich people. You'll go to rich people in the United States. Your first job is raise money from rich people who might care about this. Our job is to satisfy the whims of the people who have more than us. That is how the economy works. And we've created a society with these kinds of economic privileges, and we've created a society with political and social and other kinds of privileges. We've made these rules that create so much inequality, and we've never given back. We've never given back to people who are disadvantaged by the privileges we created. We cannot achieve reciprocity, where as you give, you shall receive. We cannot create that until we have a basic income. Until we give back to the least privileged among us, so that all of us share something in the system that we've created as a right of citizenship, as a right of residency, then we will achieve this. And that is really the main reason that I support basic income. I support basic income because it's wrong to come between somebody else and the resources they need to survive. And that is exactly what we do. That's what economic destitution and poverty are. Poverty is not people's around the world they had low consumption that they needed to survive. They didn't need money to buy what they wanted. Poverty is a lack of the financial means to buy access to the resources you need. That is created entirely by the rules of the system, rules that privilege some and harm others, and the privileged have never paid that back for the privileges they have. I'm not saying we should end all privilege. I don't know how to do that. If I knew how to do that, maybe I'd advocate it. But instead, I'm just saying, but for the privileges you get, what are you going to give back? When you talk about basic income, people will often respond with saying, well, what about incentives? And and every time I'm always glad when people ask that question, because yeah, incentives are really important, and universal basic income fixes the main incentive problem that we have in the economy today. And that is that employers don't have a good incentive to pay good wages. They don't have a good incentive to provide a safe working environment. They don't have a good incentive to share the benefits of economic growth with low, middle, and even in a lot of cases, relatively high income workers. In the last 40 years, our economy has doubled in gross domestic product, and almost all of that benefit has gone to the top 1%. Most of the rest of us are consuming at about the same level that our parents or grandparents were 40 years ago. And for a lot of us, housing is more expensive. In the United States, in real terms, minimum wage workers can buy less with their salary now than they could in the 1950s. When the US economy was not double, but 3 times the size. We haven't shared. In the 70s, people were sharing quite a bit in gains. policies that give workers power and leverage to demand these things. Basic income is about power. When you take somebody out of that position where they're desperate, oh, please, sir, will you give me a job? And say, we're a society that first meets your basic needs and then says, what can we do to get you? What can we do to get you to do jobs for us? Then you give the worker the power, say, give me good wages, give me good working conditions, give me a safe working environment, give me advancement potential, make sure my income goes up when the economy, when this company grows, make sure that there is no sexual harassment in the workplace. All of those things, all of those incentive problems are, if not completely fixed, are significantly improved by basic income. Those are the incentive problems that we have in our society today. Those are the worst incentive problems we can have. The worst thing people talk about, well, people try to portray basic income as being bad for work. Well, I don't know if it's bad for work, but it's certainly good for workers. Worst thing we're going to do for a worker is put them in a position they have, and that is exactly what we do. And respect their choices. It's good for workers. Basic income is good for workers in so many ways. In a well-structured basic income program, 40 to 70% of people would be net beneficiaries, depending on how it's structured. That is, the amount they get in basic income would be larger than the increased amount that they would pay in taxes. So it would be better off with this program in place. That's 40 to 70% of people. Now, but then that's at any given time. But when you think about that top 30%, well, a lot of those at one time in their lives, they would have benefited from this program. And I tell you, I'm very well off now. I work in the Middle East where you get paid twice as much as you do if you're a university professor here. I'm doing very well. I would be a net payer of this, but I would have been a net beneficiary when I got out of college. And I tell you, I wouldn't trade what I have now for how much better that would have made me able to build and plan my life at that time. So when you talk, if you think about, are these people at the bottom going to harm the workers? Well, it's people way down at the bottom. If you are a basic income person, you're at the bottom. It's just the bottom's not zero. Now the bottom's going to be, say, $15,000 a year or something like that. You're still at the bottom, though. You're still consuming less than everyone else. So you are at the very bottom, and the accusation is you're not harming anybody. Who never that how many of those people are, then you got to go, hey, it's so privileged that they would never program. Well, you're getting really pretty far. The reason people are at the top is not because they're better people than everyone else. It's largely because they have some kind of privilege. It might be a privilege where it gets them to do a job where they do things there. Want me to hold it? Okay, sure. Yeah, it might be something that gets them to do a job where they do something, but no matter how much your income comes from what you have done, that income, the fact that you are in the position to do that and you've built up those skills is very often because of privileges in your background. I teach in Qatar and I make great money for that. Yeah, sure, not everybody that I competed with along the way could have gotten to this spot, but there's also, at where I work in Qatar, there are people that are working for $1 an hour that are living in single-sex dormitories, separated from their families for years at a time, and they work 10 or 12-hour work days, very often 6 days a week. That's the kind of labor that Qatar imports, and don't think it's all that you're free from that. We benefit from a lot of labor like that of the things that we import from around the world, and some facilities in our own countries as well. And there is no, from where I was born, there is no possibility that I could have ended up one of the janitors where I'm working. Not a single one. No matter how bad my life, what bad choices I can make, there are none that would have led me there. And when you think about these janitors that are imported there from Sri Lanka, or Nepal, Kenya, or Philippines, there is no set of choices where they could be what I am, where they could be a professor at the University of Qatar. We are a society based on privilege, and we haven't paid back for our privilege. And from this, we get not only we get also we get from it improved education. One of the things that you find, one of the things that most improves students' ability to perform in school is if they're not hungry at home, if they aren't well housed, if they and they don't have to move very often. And studies of basic income have shown this over and over again. Students stay in school longer, they perform better in school. You get improved mental health. Some incidents have shown that when you give people a basic income, you're going to get fewer. You're going to get fewer people having mental health emergencies. So you get fewer instances of domestic abuse. Part of that could be, part of the fewer instances of domestic abuse could be from people who are stressed and angry tend to lash out inappropriately. And so you're reducing that stress, you're reducing the cause of it. But another thing is that the people who are usually victims of domestic abuse are also usually people who are financially dependent on their spouses, most often women dependent on men. You relieve that financial independence, you make it possible for people to escape abuse. That's so very important. And we are resisting this because we're clinging to this idea that everyone has to work. And we don't mean it when we say everyone has to work, because we know that the rich don't. If it's a principle, it has to be, if it's a principle in a society that has equal rights and equal freedom for all, it has to be a principle that applies to everyone, not just the less privileged. Either everyone should have to work. I don't know how you're going to work that out. If you got a society, you got to figure out, you're actually going to make the rich work if they don't want to, on maybe jobs that are equally as onerous with the ones that everybody else is doing. That's, you want to build that society. Well, you still show me your plan. I want to see your plan before I endorse that one. If you're not going to force the rich to work, you got no business forcing the children of the less privileged to work. You have, when you can ask them, what does it take to me to get you to do this job? As a free person to a free person. But now, of course, I've said all of this in answer to that question about incentives. But then I see people very often, well, that's not what I meant by incentives. Well, all that is about incentives, but that's what I meant by incentives. I mean, what about incentives for these lazy people who won't work? Well, but isn't it interesting that we look at it that way? Nobody, when people look, that's what they always go to, and they're judging workers who don't want to work. Well, a worker who doesn't want to work, I mean, you're refusing employment. You're also refusing self-employment. You're not refusing to work for yourself. We don't, most of us, unless you're wealthy, don't have the opportunity to work for ourselves, as I've been saying. That the refusal to accept employment, work, means the refusal to accept the terms of employment. Well, how do we know the reason that they're refusing to work is because they're lazy workers? Nobody ever says, maybe there's people who are refusing to work are doing so because there are cheap employers. Cheap employers who like paying poverty wages or are forced by the market to pay poverty wages because it's the only way they can make a profit in a world where everybody else is doing it. Why Why do we say of the work, we instantly judge the worker as bad and lazy, they don't work, and we never say that the employer is cheap because they won't pay wages that'll get that person to work. That is the extent to which, that really shows the extent to which the rhetoric in our society is controlled by the type of employers who like to pay low wages. And that's might not be all employers, but it's enough to create a lot of market pressure for everybody. We frame this dispute, so only this dispute about how much should a worker be paid to make them work, we frame it in a way that only the weak party to this transaction is morally subject to judgment. The more powerful party, the employer, is beyond judgment there. We in the lazy workers trope. You don't even think about what amount, how low the wages have to get before it's a good idea for a person to refuse to. And I say, for me, I think that should be the same as a question of, if I go to an automobile dealership and a guy's selling a car and I don't want to buy the car, I don't call him a lazy car dealer because he won't sell the price for what I want to sell it. And he might call me a cheap car shopper because I wouldn't pay what he said, but it doesn't harm me that he says that. But usually when in any other good, it's not so much that we don't usually morally judge these people who don't want to transact. If I don't want to buy a car, say, okay, you don't want to buy a car for what he's selling it for. He doesn't want to buy a car for what you're willing to pay. Then it's not that one of you is a bad person. It is that the transaction was wrong. The deal was wrong. So what I think the good way, the question about what the wages should be, the wage should be, what is enough to pay someone to make them want to do it? Not because we're depriving them of all access to resources that they need to survive to do it, but because they've got their needs met and they want to do better. How much do you have? How much can you help them do better by getting to do this task that you don't want to do yourself? That's when you've got the right wage. When the two free people agree to make this exchange when neither of them have to. And so that also, I think there's something really telling in that about this lazy workers idea is that it's never contingent on wages. They never say, well, if there was a wage was low enough, then it would be right for them to refuse. You never hear people saying that. That it is, so it's really not about getting people to work. It is about getting people to accept the wages and working conditions that exist. And yet we know that the wages and working conditions throughout the United States and Canada and a lot of other countries are really bad at the low end, and they're not that great in the middle either. A lot of us are doing really unfulfilling jobs for good wages that have questionable value for helping our society. We're using poverty, which we've created by the way we've distributed resources, as a threat to get bad jobs done cheaply by people who are fearing economic destitution. We should be ashamed of ourselves that this is how we organize our society. There is a better way. There's a better way that is kinder and less stressful and more harmonious, and a better way to build a society that really works for everyone. And that is to empower every last person by making sure we're going to make sure your needs are met. After that, we're going to try to get your cooperation on the projects that we want to do. But we're only going to do that if we can make conditions for that worthwhile. That's why I support basic income. Thank you.
So we have some time for questions and we'll open it up to the audience here. First, there's a microphone, I believe, circulating.
We have more than one microphone?
There is somewhere, I think Natalie has one in person. So there's a question in the room. I'll just look, oh, here's one. Natalie, over here, please.
In your talk, I didn't hear you mention a word about temporary foreign workers who are brought by their employers and how that impacts the lower income people who are Canadian workers.
Well, you mean, foreigners that are brought in on temporary visas? Is that what
Yes,
you're talking about?
temporary foreign workers.
Yeah, well, I don't think that is something that we need to fear. That is, that a society that has a growing and dynamic economy attracts people from other countries to want to come and work. Societies that are stagnating don't. And very often the people that are going to take the effort to leave their home and travel to a far away and very different society are often big go-getters that are going to contribute a lot to what everyone else does. So it's not necessarily a threat to our wages or our working conditions. We keep our quotas for immigration low, I think more because of xenophobia than because of protecting our own wages. It is, of course, it is a possibility that we get a lot of people coming in. It will hold down wages, but there are other ways to do that, such as having a higher minimum wage and saying, okay, you've got to hire native, you got to hire citizens first, but we're going to have a higher wage, and then people will come when there are jobs available. So no, I do not think that workers from overseas are something for us to fear, especially if they're empowered. If you one of the things that a lot of companies do is they try to hire people who have a questionable status, so they have a lot of power over them, and that we've got to not prosecute that. You don't prosecute the weakest person in that part of that transaction, which is the temporary worker. You should be prosecuting the employers who are holding this power over.
We have a question back here. I do want to go on. Can I go online real quick, and then we'll come to you, just because I have a couple pop up here. We had a question about. You talked a lot about power and structure that's kind of creating these conditions for, unequal conditions. How do you sell this program in a world, in that kind of world, Karl? How do you make this, sellable, make it happen, given that the power is so much?
Yeah, that's a big problem. When I began my interest in this long before we were at the Levy Institute, that's when I really started writing on it in a big way. But I've been interested in basic income since I was a teenager, and I started working on it because I believe that poverty and inequality and economic destitution was the biggest problem that we had. But now I looked at, well, there's a lot of other problems that are just as big, such as militarism, such as growing white nationalism, and the power of money in politics. We do not live in real democracy when money has that much power. In the United States, the top 10%, if no one in the top 10% supports a program, even if it's widely popular with the bottom 90%, it will not pass. We've essentially given the donor class a veto over our legislation. We need democratic reforms to get money out of politics. I don't know if that's a prerequisite for a lot of other things that we want to do, but it's something really important that there are a lot of people working on that right now. I'm not working on that issue, but it's an exceedingly important issue. Just go to the back.
Is this on? I want to acknowledge eternal gift economy. Eternal gift economy looks at resources that we have, and all of us have had. Once we're born, we're taught language, we're given food, nurturing, free of charge by way of maternal gift. One of the most dangerous questions I ask and asked is what is your income, assets, and resources? That immediately stimulates so much shame toward the middle class. So I want to acknowledge that middle classism plays a part in how the structure needs to be. So when it comes to basic living income, I find that to be a functional but temporary transaction, in that it's not sustainable because it still keeps the rich. So how I want to ask this question is, in the large middle class, we have a bias to continue building our wealth higher and higher, creating artificial accumulation and manufactured scarcity. This means if we don't bring it laterally and redistribute it now to the places that need it most, we need to be conscious this structure of higher state. So I would like to ask the middle class, of most of which I'm guessing are here, to reconsider what their basic needs are, what their basic needs are, and can we take the surplus and redistribute it where we need it?
Yeah, I agree with that. It is, it goes back to that quote that I read from Bertrand Russell, that on this basis, we may build further. Basic income is not all there is to social justice, and the power that is held by the people at the very top because of the way we structure our society is very dangerous. And I would support a lot of other reforms to get to that. But I do not see it as temporary or something that can be replaced by something else unless we can build a world where resources are freely available to people, because what basic income does, no matter what other reforms you have, if there is nothing that's unconditional toward the people at the bottom, then the people at the bottom are at mercy to whatever the power structure is. Even if it's a very democratic power structure, that power structure is usually going to be made up of people who are in some way privileged, and the people who are least advantaged are usually farthest from the power structures, least understood by the people who are making decisions, and most vulnerable to them. If you take that power away from them, the power that having a basic income large enough to meet their own basic needs, if you take that power away from them, you bring an injustice back. We need a society where everywhere and always the least powerful people have enough power to control their own lives.
I'm suggesting the middle class is the one that's making the bulk of decisions, or where that's distribution is.
I think the middle class are driven, some of those type of middle class decision makers that you're talking about, I think are a lot driven about higher income people very effectively getting the middle class on their side by playing on their fears. But it is the money and the power of the people at the top, I think, that is the most dangerous. But yes, you have to change the minds of the people in the middle as well to really reform our society. That who's driving it, I might disagree on, but what has to change, I think I agree on.
I'm going to go to a question online, kind of alternate back and forth. We have a few questions, Carl, that relate to inflation.
Yeah.
So what happens if we introduce a basic income tomorrow? Don't we just see prices escalate? Wouldn't landlords just increase their rent? Wouldn't we see those kind of prices adjust consequently?
Well, specifically on rent, remember that basic income is you're gonna have basic income and you're going to have to raise taxes in order to counteract this inflationary pressure they're talking about. Not everyone's net income is gonna go up. The people at the very bottom, their net income is gonna go up quite a bit. The people towards the middle, their net income is only gonna go up a little bit. And then the people, as you get higher above the median, people's net income is gonna go down. So land across the board is not going to be more expensive. Now, that does imply that land in low-income neighborhoods, rent there might become more expensive. However, that also means rent in higher income neighborhoods might become less expensive. That's, in one way, that's a bad thing because it takes back some of the gains we want for the low-income people. However, there's one good side of that. That means less housing inequality. Less housing inequality is a good thing. And so if we can adjust the basic income to make sure it is high enough that low-income people can afford housing, then we have a system where we have more equality in housing and everybody being able to afford housing. Now, for inflation in general, basic income is not special spend. When the government spends money, it creates expansionary or inflationary pressure. When it taxes people or when it borrows money for the people, it creates deflationary or contractionary pressure. Now, those aren't the only two things in the country that create inflationary and contractionary pressure. That's also caused by a lot of things in the banking system and investment and things like that. But if the government is doing its job well, which at the moment it's not doing a terribly good job, but if the government is doing its job well, it is using the tax and spending system to balance out contractionary and inflationary pressures. You have more money coming into the economy, creating demand for goods by having a basic income. You tax that money back to reduce what taxes do we need to make the resources available that these people are going to want to buy? Taxes targeted at the most wasteful spending that the people in the higher half or third of the income distribution will counteract that inflationary pressure. And so basic income is it's not more likely to cause inflation than anything else. I've estimated that the net cost of a basic income high enough to eliminate official poverty in the United States is 2.95% of GDP. And we found in Britain, we had a similar estimate that I did with a co-author in Britain. That's not a huge amount of new spending, especially when you think there are other things that will become cheaper and we can spend less on, such as all the things we do to try to make homeless people uncomfortable because so they'll leave our neighborhoods. All of those things become cheaper. It's not terribly expensive. We've raised spending on things like this before. When the Korean War was a much bigger jump in spending, and it didn't come with inflation in the early 1950s, and we're talking about with basic income. So it's certainly something that's possible. Question from the floor.
Hi, so usually, anytime anybody suggests efforts to redistribute wealth and income, there's a lot of resistance to that. And so, I can hear sort of the right-wing conservative elements going. This will create a disincentive to investment if we roll out universal basic income. Or we can say, or I can also hear the argument, we can't afford it, that UBI will increase our debt and deficits in our countries. So can you address those questions?
Yeah, well, why do we want rich people to invest? We want rich people to invest because it's going to make our lives better. And over the last 40 years, our lives haven't financially gotten terribly better when there's been plenty of investment on rich people. So if that investment goes down somewhat, I don't think that's a huge deal. And a lot of what wealthy people invest in is not always that good for society as a whole. Do you know that there are helicopter taxi services where you can call up a helicopter to come to your house and take your kid to their tennis lesson several provinces away if you want to do that. That's not really doing us a lot. We subsidize airports that are only used by these small private plane airports that are only used by the super rich. that kind of investment, I'm not so sad if that kind of thing declines, but there's also another kind of investment is people buying land and just leaving it sit as an investment in a really safe investment, because land tends not to go down. So even if you don't do anything with it, you just hold it for a while until land values go up. And the more inequality we have, the more investments like these we get. And then there's less, and that bids up the cost of land in our cities and bids up our rent. So it actually, that kind of investment actually makes us all worse off when you're buying land and sitting there. Or when in the old days, rich person used to be able to afford 2 or 3 houses, now 10 or 12 houses. When you're buying 10 or 12 houses and you're leaving them sit empty 11 months a year, that also bids up the price of housing in our cities. That makes us worse off. So not all of these investments are things that we need. What we need really is a thoughtful tax and benefit system that gives the wealthy an incentive to do the things that we want them to do, to direct their money for the things that are really going to help people. And to do that, what you got to do is make it profitable to sell things to low-income people. Well, if low-income people don't have a lot of money, there's no profit in selling them stuff. So this is a great way to direct our investment to the things that we want. And also, it's possible to use this as a tool, as a more direct tool to direct investment. Say, if you want to tax the things that you want to do less of. So you can tax use of carbon. You can tax the creation of plastics. You can tax people based on how much pollution or how much garbage it creates. You have those kind of taxes. Then you redistribute that in a form of basic income, and that effectively does. So everybody's getting the basic income, but everybody's paying taxes on the most wasteful types of consumption and investment. That means that you're effectively making all of the green things cheaper and all of the polluting things more expensive, redirecting investment in a direction that's more sustainable. Basic income is a really important tool to do that.
I have no questions online, so I'll take another one from the room here.
Just had a question around the implementation. Just thinking back, I was in Winnipeg when COVID hit, running a large salvage farming facility. We had 200 transitional housing beds that funded all of our other programs just because we had so many. And when COVID hit and the government gave everyone money, they all moved out and we were in danger of closing. So they moved out because they wanted to be a place with no rules. And so everybody made bad choices. The government made bad choices. The clients made a bad choice because a month later they wanted to come back, but we didn't get rent from them anymore because they had forfeited their places to live out because they had money temporarily. So I'm just wondering, I know from 36 years working in this field that a lot of people do make bad decisions. But I still think universal basic income is a good idea. What I'm wondering is, how do we get there from here? Because if we just give everyone the money tomorrow, it's going to be a disaster. There needs to be something leading to that. Have you given much thought to that?
Well, people do make bad choices, but not everyone makes bad choices, and we shouldn't have a paternalistic policy that tells everybody what to do, because some of them will make bad choices. So many people are helped by having their basic income having their basic needs met by something like basic income, that a lot of your other problems that stem from bad choices are easier to solve. And this is also true of children who don't make choices for themselves. Imagine a child with neglectful or bad parents. It is better to have a neglectful parent or an otherwise harmful parent who is not poor than it is to have a neglectful parent who has no money to begin with. All of these problems get simpler if we're not constantly threatening so much of our workforce with homelessness. Then we can put other resources into addressing those of these problems that don't get better. We can concentrate our resources on what do we do that's going to help people who, whether it's through a bad choice or some other problem, is in a difficult situation.
We have time for one more quick question.
We just had a quick follow-up on that.
Oh.
On that question.
Okay,
Sorry.
a real quick one, because we have other people on the picture. Yep.
Again, just to speak to, you spoke to land that's being held for long periods of time and not. I can walk in suburban Saskatoon, and I think based on the COVID response and financial support for local. Right now, if middle class asks the city for a policy and tax reimbursement for every garage to be converted to space for someone to live, that's right there power in the immediate for land use that the middle class has access to.
Yeah, that would be a great thing.
Okay, got a quick question. I think Isabel had her question, hand up. And Carl, well, we have to get going pretty soon now. But there's a bit of time to chat afterwards. Natalie, can you pass the microphone? Isabel, this is our last question.
Thank you. And thank you for underlining selective moralizing that goes on all the time.
Oh, what a great phrase. I have to use that.
And the scapegoating of the most marginalized. And, you know, we did research that demonstrates that, yes, there will be a few that will exploit, but the vast majority use the resource incredibly creatively to change lives. But the other big argument against is we can't afford it, right? The cost. And again, it's selective viewing of what we can afford as a society. That we put up with the enormous waste of the current system that actively acts as a disincentive to work, right? If you're on social assistance, there are all these rules. And the waste in terms of the cost to the healthcare system, the justice system, the education system, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, I'm just wondering how we get over the extent to which moralizing is built in, selective moralizing is built into the way people think about things. It's so naturalized that it's so hard to get over those resistances.
Yeah, and I'm a theorist, and I consider myself I'm a support for the activists who work out the strategies. So what the best strategy to get there from here is I often leave to the activists. But what I try to do is to make, when I speak, I try not to say the same old things over again that other people are saying. I try to get people to think of things in a different way. What are the things that are unsaid in this debate? Why is it unsaid that if there's a possibility of a lazy worker, there must be a possibility of a cheap employer? Why does that keep going unsaid? Point out, see what people are taking for granted and challenge that. That's what I try to do, and I hope that we're all doing that to some extent.
All right, I know there's a lot more conversation we could have, but I want to thank Carl for an engaging and vigorous presentation. Thank you so much, Carl. Thank you all for coming. And we'll be posting this online and sometime soon. And thank you all. Have a good day.